Something that you might not realize about Aboriginal Australia, they have the oldest, longest running culture on Earth. 60,000 years. It's a really sad history. It's a litany of dispossession. Maybe my job here as a storyteller wasn't to just document a disappearing culture in this modern world. Maybe it was to look at this living, breathing, thriving part of their culture and how important it is to the future health of their communities. I am going to talk to you tonight about my journey through Aboriginal Australia, which began in a cave in Western Australia. And I was wedged between rocks, trying to get the best angle on a piece of rock art. I was working on a story for National Geographic magazine about a group of animals that had gone extinct, all at the same time, 50,000 years ago. And there was a raging debate as to whether or not humans, specifically Aboriginal Australians, had something to do with it. The critter that you see on the end of this hunter's spear was maybe one of those animals. There was also a 10-foot kangaroo. There was an 18-foot constrictor snake. And there was an animal that I don't know how best to describe except ask you to imagine a hairless marsupial chipmunk, and then make it the size of a rhinoceros. And then you have a diprotodon that walked here 80,000 years ago. My husband, Matt Moyer, who's in the audience, and also a photojournalist, came on this assignment with me, and here we are in his assignment in the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt for National Geographic magazine, and we try to do that as much as possible because otherwise we wouldn't see each other very much. So our journey to get to this rock art began with a chartered flight to a remote community and then a good part of a day on a dirt track in a four-wheel drive vehicle. Not really out of the ordinary for trying to get to anywhere in the world remote. It's a lot of logistics and just trying to get to where you're supposed to go. And so in the midst of that, it's really important to remember what's important. What's the big picture? And so I had one of these moments when I finally got to my rock art and I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna make my picture. And I thought, who is this person that drew this hunting scene? And I assumed it was a man because of traditional hunter roles. And I thought, who is this guy? He's documenting his day. He's documenting the world around him. And I started to feel connected to this fellow storyteller. This person that was communicating to me from tens of thousands of years ago, something into the future about his people and his people's relationship to these animals. So, something that you might not realize about Aboriginal Australia. They have the oldest, longest running culture on Earth. 60,000 years they've been around. So a few days later, I found myself sitting across from Jack and Lily Karadada in the Aboriginal community of Columbaroo. It's the gateway to and from this rock art. So Matt and I decided to stop for one night, and we were gonna see if we could find some Aboriginal art. And we were led to Lily, because she's known globally for her paintings. So when Jack found out that we were from the United States, his eyes lit up. And he told me how he worked side by side with the Americans during World War II. And how with his bare hands, he helped build a strategic airstrip that helped fight the Japanese, who had invaded Timor just a couple hundred miles to the north of where we were sitting. And then Lily started to talk to me about their childhood and how they both grew up naked and in the bush, a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And then Lily started to talk about her country And when Aboriginal Australians talk about their country, what they're talking about is the land that's theirs by birthright, where they're from, the land that they're of, their ancestral lineage. And so then Lily started to tell me how everything in her country, the rocks, the trees, the water, the fish, the birds, even the sand flies that bite really horribly and hard, were her family, that she was connected to all of them and they were connected to her. So these are things as Americans we read a lot about in New Agey magazines, and we're like, oh yeah, let's get connected. But in Aboriginal Australia, it really, it is the structure of their society. It dictates who you marry, how you address somebody, and even what you eat. So let's go back to that thing of how long Aboriginal Australians have been around. So if the indigenous population of Australia today, that's Lily and her ancestors, have been around for 60,000 years, the last 250 years of colonization have brought around the most change than ever. Albeit kind of slow in some areas because it's this really huge, vast, remote country. The last hunter-gatherer group walked out of the Gibson Desert in 1984 into the town of Alice Springs. Still, if you think about it then, Aboriginal culture went along pretty much uninterrupted, at least nothing like colonization, for 59,750 years. Jack and Lily were able to walk in both of these worlds because they remained in pre-colonized Australia until World War II pulled them out. And I thought back to that ancient storyteller in the cave who made that hunting scene, and I thought, wow, Jack's life as a kid was probably pretty similar to that ancient storyteller's, hunting on the same landscape. Jack and Lily were bridges between two alien worlds. And when Lily talked about her childhood and that connectedness to her country, her eyes just lit up. She had a glimmer in them. And it made me wonder, where could I find that connection in Aboriginal Australia today? Because it was so contrary to the prevalent story that I was hearing everywhere about the downtrodden indigenous group of Australia. Don't get me wrong, it's a really sad history. National Geographic staff writer Kathy Newman wrote, it's a litany of dispossession. There's stolen land. There's government policies that controlled their movement, who they married, where they worked. They even took their children away. From 1909 to 1969, government agencies went into the home of Aboriginal Australian families and removed their children without any proof of neglect. And today they're known as the stolen generation. So after meeting Jack and Lily and the rock art, I was hooked. And so I proposed a story to National Geographic and they accepted. And I learned that after 250 years of dispossession, the Aboriginal Australian population had the highest rate of heart disease, kidney disease, cancer, diabetes, and they die on average 10 years earlier than their white Australian counterparts. 16% unemployment, as opposed to 5% for the rest of Australia. And they make up a third of the prison population. Trying to impose a European style of education on an indigenous group does not always work very well. So only 37% of Aboriginal students graduate from high school. I was in a community where the principal had to go around every morning, door to door, and round the kids up. Otherwise, she said no one would attend. And the teacher cried herself to sleep almost every night because she was so frustrated about not getting through to the kids. So you see little Maddie down there in the left-hand corner. She's 4 years old. completely disconnected in this classroom. And here he is again, completely connected, learning about his culture and how to manage his land with fire just as his ancestors have for tens of thousands of years. So this moment from disconnect to connect really connected something for me. And I thought, maybe my job here as a storyteller wasn't to just document a disappearing culture in this modern world. Maybe it was to look at this living, breathing, thriving part of their culture and how important it is to the future health of their communities. Most non-Indigenous Australians have never met an Aboriginal person. And most Australian news stories about Aboriginals are negative. I felt like there was some piece of this story missing. And the Aboriginal population is sort of faceless. They don't have education, they don't have jobs, all the things that we value in Western hyped up society is not what they have. And so I thought maybe if I could find that connectedness that I saw with Maddie, they would see something different. So I started to look to the remote communities. And I learned about the Homelands movement from the 1970s, when a more liberal Australian government gave incentives for people to go back to their homeland and utilize their land and live there. Homeland for the Aboriginal person is your being. It's where you have been for thousands of years. Dispossess the person from that and they become nothing. Maybe this was where I could find that glimmer I saw in Lily's eyes, the homelands. Extensive studies have shown that Aboriginal families that are utilizing their homelands are healthier, they live longer. They hold on to their language and culture. They pass on their language and culture to younger generations. And they utilize their homelands for food and cultural practices. They spend more time with their family. And Aboriginal youth that spend more time on their homelands are less likely to get involved with drugs and alcohol. So my first night on a homeland went something like this. It's always a crazy road to get there. You're gonna get stuck. You're gonna get bogged down. Really deep sand. So it was a really long day, and we got there really late at night. And I had this big truck, and some young Aboriginal boys were helping me because they knew the road, so they drove it. We got in really late at night. Set up my tent, went straight to sleep. Next morning, I woke up, go to my truck to go find something, and I heard this crashing and banging and sand flying everywhere, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I was looking up and down, and I look in the back, and there was a 400-pound sea turtle in the back of my truck, on its back, upside down. What? Like, these are the moments that challenge you on assignment. They're kind of random. You wouldn't be able to predict it, but it's like, yeah, that would be challenging. So it turns out boys will be boys, and they went out hunting after I went to sleep, and they found themselves a sea turtle. And they figured that because they had the keys to my truck, you know, that was where it should go for the night, is in the back of my truck, up on its back. And so they were waiting to keep it alive until the rest of the family came so they could butcher it. And I have to admit, it really wasn't easy for me to watch it get killed because I've swam with these, but I'm also not a vegetarian. So, and then I saw how they utilized every part of this animal for food. And here they were washing the guts for a soup. It was amazing. And somehow I got talked into eating these. These are the eggs straight from the belly of the turtle. And there was a number of other foods that got me, like pushed me to my limit on this. I wasn't brave enough to eat these witchetty grubs raw, but cooked, they taste like cheesy eggs. These are cycad nuts, and they get turned into a flour and then a bread, but if it's not prepared correctly, you die. And this is wallaby, which is really delicious, actually. But this is really what my diet looked like most of the time. So by the time I got to the end of this assignment, I had cast quite a web of connections throughout Australia. You can see all those red dots are places where I actually spent some time. But one of these connections spun me back up to the top there, called Arnhem Land, which is right up there in that clump of red flags that you see. And it also spun me back to National Geographic. So it turns out, almost 70 years ago in 1948, National Geographic ran a joint expedition with Smithsonian Institute. And then Arnhem Land was really, really remote. You couldn't even drive there. You had to go by boat, and it was months and months. They spent almost a year there. And they collected all the things that they do in a 1948 expedition. They took like birds and flora and fauna and all sorts of data. But they also took human skulls. And a couple years ago, as part of a global trend to return human remains to the rightful owners, the Smithsonian decided that they would return these human skulls to Australia, to Arnhem Land, and to the community to which they belong. This is the photographer, the National Geographic photographer on the assignment, Hal Walker. Photographing some kids in the same area that I was in. So you might wonder, okay, how did they figure out where those skulls belonged? Well, it turned out those skulls had paintings on them. And those paintings had the story of that person's country on them. And so when they showed the skulls to some elders in the area, they knew exactly what land they went to and to who they belonged. So the descendants of these skulls decided that they wanted to honor them by bringing them back and burying them with a traditional log coffin ceremony. And a log coffin ceremony had not been done in this community for over 40 years. So anybody here who had seen it were just little kids when it happened. So this whole community was coming together trying to piece together how to do this ceremony. And it goes something like this. So you bury the deceased, and you leave their body in the ground until just bones remain. You exhume the bones, and then you find a log hollowed out by termites, and you paint the story of that person on the log, like they are here. So all these critters that you see on this log are the story of that person who died and their country. And then you put the remains back in the hollowed log, and you let them go back to their country. You just leave it out there. So finally, ceremony day happened. One of the ceremonies that day, or part of the ceremony, was private. And it was for men only, and it was for only the men of the deceased. But they asked me to document it. And I said, sure, of course I'll document it. And they said, no, this is not for your magazine. Nobody else can see this. This is only for us. We want a visual record of this ceremony so that if it doesn't happen again for 40 years or more, our future generations will know what happened, and they can do it themselves because they can learn from it. And so I documented the ceremony, and I can't show it to you today. But maybe that visual record will be a bridge across time, just like that story in the cave by the ancient storyteller with the hunting scene. And it'll offer a pathway for this community to speak to their future generations about their culture. And maybe somebody's grandson, or better yet, great-great-great-great-granddaughter, will watch this visual record and she'll learn something about herself and her people and her homeland. Thank you very much.